Hi, my name is Bethany Marshall, and I'm the CEO at Publishizer. Welcome, Keri and Amanda. Thank you so much for joining me today. I am so excited for anyone who's interested in the publishing process or about discovering new books to have a chance to learn from you both today. So, Amanda, would you mind maybe just introducing yourself and what you do at Split Seed?
My name is Amanda, and I'm the co-founder at Split Seed Media. And we come along authors at all stages in the writing process, even when their book is still writing them, as they're even going through their experiences. They know what they want to capture for a book, but they're not quite, they're still going through the experience, all the way through the process of structuring their book, deciding how to publish, and all stages of the writing and editing process as well. So we really are honored to partner with authors who have a message to share, and they're ready to expand their influence in the form of a book.
Oh, thank you so much. And I think as we get into this conversation with Keri, you'll see exactly why I thought this is going to be such an exciting book, because she really does have a great message behind it, and one that's very moving and also offers a ton of benefit to readers. So, Keri, could you introduce yourself and tell us just a little bit about Recovering Cinderella?
Thank you, Bethany, for the opportunity to be here, and I appreciate Amanda's time. Yes, my name is Keri Lauderdale Olson. I am a not once, but twice divorced woman who is writing a book about how divorce is not the end of your story. Most of us have read fairy tales from the time we were little girls, and we know that every good fairy tale starts once upon a time and ends with, and they lived happily ever after. But in almost 50% of the cases, divorce does not, or marriage does not end with a happily ever after. It ends in divorce. And so this book is really about my own journey through divorce and about sharing what I've learned in coaching women. I've been coaching women through divorce for many years and helping them realize that divorce is not the end of their story. There is still a happily ever after in their future, and it's one that they can create. So it's just the end of one of the chapters in their life.
Yeah, Keri, thank you so much for your time today too. And one thing that we talk to authors first, and what really makes a lasting and impactful book, is if the idea behind the book is actually larger than the book. If that idea lives in you, if it lives in different ways of expressing itself, when we call that the book's idea DNA. But it really is something that lives in you. And so I would just, if you don't mind sharing, I would love to hear a little bit more about your personal experience that caused you to write Recovering Cinderella.
Absolutely. So, like many people, I got married young. I got married when I was 22 the first time, and my mother had just passed away. So, kind of searching for a family of my own, that was my dream. And got married young, had three sons in 3 years, and was married for 13 years. And like many couples that married young, we were not the same people that we thought we were when we got married. We weren't really sure who we were at that point. And so got divorced and was a single mom with three young boys, and entered into the dating pool a little bit too early, as a lot of people who go through divorce do. And you're searching for that validation, and it's all new and exciting. And I had been single about a year when I met who I call Prince Charming. And Prince Charming was straight out of a Hallmark movie, which is really kind of funny because I worked at Hallmark at the time. I had worked at Hallmark for several years. And I used to joke that I had found my Prince Charming from a Hallmark movie. And, he was the most romantic man I'd never, ever met, and really literally came in and swept me off my feet. He called me Cinderella. I would travel for business, and I would get to where I was going, and there would be roses from Prince Charming to Cinderella. And when we finally did get married, it was truly a fairy tale wedding. It was at, an old mansion, and we had the Cinderella carriage. He bought me glass slippers. I mean, it was the whole fairy tale. And unfortunately, within a week, I started to find out that Prince Charming really was just a toad in disguise. There were a lot of lies. He was not who he said he was. And I found myself moving from a Hallmark movie to a Lifetime movie of the week, and not in a good way. And so what ensued was 3 years of the worst years of my life. And, I didn't leave the marriage when I should have, probably right when I found out some of the things that he had lied about early on, but there were many more I found out as the years went on. And there was this shame and this fear and this, sense of, I don't want to fail twice. I don't want to be divorced twice. I can't have a second divorce. And so it ultimately got to the point where I went through another divorce, and it tore me apart. I mean, it literally brought me to my knees, severe depression. I didn't know how to pick up the pieces and rebuild this life because I felt like a failure, and I just was tremendously lost. And as anyone who's gone through a divorce, you realize that it's kind of like a death. And if you've gone through it, you understand it. But if you haven't, it's hard to compare death of a person to the death of a marriage, but it really is the same. You have to go through the same process. And so you have to grieve like this life that you thought you had, and the family and everything else that goes away as part of the divorce, and a lot of times. So I went through this horrible divorce, and I started writing at that time, and I called it Recovering Cinderella. And this was 12, almost 13 years ago. And I was still so hurt that I couldn't really write about it yet. I had not healed enough to write about it. However, I was asked to lead a group of women at church around this time. And at the time, I was like, I am the last person in the world that needs to be leading a group of women, especially at church, and I'm a mess. But a dear friend at the church had really just had this on her heart, that I was supposed to lead these women. And the only thing we all had in common was divorce. And so that was the first group of women that I kind of led. And that was 12 years ago. And those women saved me. We saved each other. We became sisters. And I saw the power of women lifting each other up and supporting each other through one of the hardest things in life, and building new lives they loved after that. And so Recovering Cinderella has been on my heart a long time. And several years ago, I started posting on social media because several people I knew were going through divorce. And I really just wanted to just offer some words of inspiration, and just so that other women knew they weren't alone, because that's the number one feeling. You feel like you're alone, and there's nobody that understands what you're feeling. And I started posting on Instagram and Facebook. And before I knew it, I had 1,000 followers, and then a few thousand. And these were women from around the world, and they were sending me messages telling me that it helped just to know there was somebody that understood, that I got it. And so the idea for a book came back around. And during COVID, I took 60 hours of classes to become a master certified life coach, so that I was better empowered to help women and coach them. And then I launched a podcast. And so the podcast is also called Recovering Cinderella. And I would interview women who had been either, they had been divorced for some time. And so they were over the hurt, and they had rebuilt their lives. And so I interviewed them and asked them things about, what was it that was the breaking point? Because there's usually a breaking point, for one party or the other, and what they wish they'd known when they were going through the divorce. And some of their stories are just heartbreaking, what they went through, and then they're years down the road, and how they rebuilt these new lives and what they did. And so that really caused me to come back around and go, I need to tell these stories. I need to write this book. And the book is really about, number one, my own journey, and the things that I was searching for to help me through that journey. But the second part is really giving women some tools and some practical advice that they can use on how they get through this horrible time of their lives, but how they actually start to put the pieces together and build new lives that they can love after divorce, and start to get through the other side of that, and realize that, if I start focusing on these things instead of those things, then my perspective changes, and giving, tools and tips and stories. And it's really meant to empower women to find new lives they love after divorce.
Oh, thank you for sharing that. That's amazing. It reminds me, there's one thing that we often talk with authors is the story arc. So if we're an observer looking at a story, at the beginning, there's the protagonist, living their life as normal. And then, there's something that happens that breaks their reality as they know it, right? And that's when the story gets really exciting. So as an observer, as a reader, watching from the outside, it's when things really go crazy in the story that we get engaged and, think it's a great story. But then there's the perspective of the protagonist going through the story, right? So if you think about it from the inside out, the protagonist is the one going into the cave. I mean, if you use Joseph Campbell's The Hero's Journey motif, I mean, like, we're facing the worst of ourselves and it feels really lonely. And, it's I just so appreciate the fact that you're someone who has gone into the cave and has come out with a gift to share with other people, and ideally become a mentor to people going through that journey when they think they're alone. And so, I mean, there's just so much power to that. And that just, the fact that you embody your message is really powerful too. So I really appreciate you sharing that.
Thank
But,
you.
it's good to remember too. I mean, just as an editor who works with stories, it's, our readers are kind of in this observer mentality sometimes where they forget how the protagonist feels until they become the protagonist themselves. And so I just really appreciate you coming alongside people who are struggling too.
Thank you. It took me, I'm going to be honest, and I'm very transparent with people when I talk about it. It took me years to get to that point, because there's a lot of why me, and you see people that are happily married for 30 years and you realize that's never going to be you. And it took me a long time to realize that maybe I went through these things because I was meant to help other women get through them. And so that took a long time to get to that perspective, but now it is my passion, and it is, what I want to do. And I really want to give women, these tools and to really help them. And, it's what I searched for when I was going through my own divorce and wish that there had been. So I hope that I can offer that. That is really what I want to be able to do.
Yeah. And so the message I'm hearing too is that divorce is just the end of a chapter. It's not the end of your story. And that the best is yet to come. Is that right? I think that's how you put it.
Absolutely how I put it. And I say that a lot. I say, it's not, divorce is not the end of your chapter, or the end of your story. It is the end of your chapter. That you get to start writing your new story immediately, and it can be anything that you want it to be. But that can be intimidating too, right? As you're sitting there and you're thinking, okay, wow, what do I do with my life? And so part of this book is actually giving them some tools and some activities to help them start to center what they want it to be, because part of it's even visualizing what you want it to be and then creating a plan to make it that way. And it's I found that it can be very intimidating to say, okay, that's great, it's the end of the story, but I have this blank paper looking at me, and what do I want to fill it with? And so I encourage women to do things like date themselves, take themselves out and figure out, what they like to do on their own. And I use an example that, when you're married, once you're divorced, you're not the same person you were before you got married. You've changed, and once you're divorced, you're no longer the person you were when you were married. You're no longer part of this couple and this unit. So you have to figure out who this new woman is. And you have to figure out what she likes and what she doesn't like and who she wants to be. And so it's really a process. And I think if you have a little bit of guidance and you have a little bit of help, it really does give you something to focus on instead of looking in the rearview mirror, wishing and wondering what if.
Absolutely. And I think one beautiful thing you've done is you've shared your message before you started writing your book to get feedback from other people and to really know your future readers, even though you didn't know they were your future readers, right? And so I've, the advice I've heard from agents and publishers is that they're always looking for an author who knows their readers really well, who can speak their language and is sharing their message in all sorts of ways. And it really sounds like you did everything in the right order, whether you knew it or not.
And I even have a private Facebook group that I started years ago. And the women that were in that group, most of them have moved forward, but some of them were part of my original podcast. And I have a marketing background. That's what I've done for 30 years is marketing. And so I understood the importance of making sure that what I was trying to offer for women was what they wanted and what they needed. And I think that one of the things that I've heard consistently that resonates with the women that I am connecting with is I'm authentic.
Mhm.
I know what it's like. Right now we talk about cuffing season. And so, I know what it's like not to be cuffed during cuffing season. I know what it's like to be single in a couple's world, particularly at the holidays. I think it's really, really hard, especially when it's your first holiday season, newly divorced. And so I feel that pain. I felt it. I've lived it. And because of that, I think women can connect with me because I do truly get it and I understand it. And it's not all sugar coated because it is hard and it's raw and it's painful.
Yeah. Well, in terms of the writing process, sharing your message with other people, you got feedback, you knew, ooh, maybe this is an idea bigger than just me. This is something that could really help other women. I'd love to hear about your writing process in terms of how you started, how you knew this was a book, and maybe where you are now.
Yeah, so I started writing blogs. I just literally sat down and started writing blogs about the things that kept coming up, being alone during the holidays, or I wrote one blog called My Life in Pictures, and it just started from an everyday thing. I was going through a tub of old pictures, and all of a sudden, I saw my life. Like I saw when I was a bride at 22, I saw when I was, single at 35, and how my life has changed over the years. And so writing that blog and getting feedback from women
Mhm.
was it was like, okay, there's more to this. And then tying that in with, becoming a divorce coach and trying to help women, I'm like, it would be great if I could give them this tools, and in a book format that says, okay, read this because you're at this step. And there is no, there's no roadmap that's the same for everybody. There's different things, and just like a grieving process, there's different steps, but there are things that you can do, and it makes a conscious effort. And so that's been what initially started was the writing process was the blog. I've always loved to write. I was the editor of my college paper. I have written since high school. But I kept getting told, I wish you had a book, I wish you had a book, I wish you had a book. And so that's kind of where it started. I was very fortunate in that a really good friend of mine had gone through Publishizer and published her first book last year. And I was at her book launch, and she was very supportive and recommended, that I connect with Publishizer. And it kind of gave me a feeling that I wasn't alone in this process, right? That I wasn't having to do this by myself, and there were other authors out there, and it had a platform where I could learn more and, how to write a book proposal. And because I was kind of lost, I didn't know how to put together a book proposal. And then I put together the outline, and now I'm kind of working through, writing those chapters. And the outline came naturally because these are things that I talk about all the time. And now it's just like, okay, so here's how I tell the story, because I feel like the first part is really sharing my own story. Number one, to share credibility. I know what, I know what I'm talking about because I've been through it and I've lived it. And here's my story. So I feel like I have to be vulnerable and be transparent with my readers so that they understand what I went through. And I'm honest in some of those things about, hey, this is what you should do. I'm not saying I always did that. It wasn't always, these are the mistakes I made. And actually there's a chapter in the book about that. Like, these are the things everybody's going to tell you to do. Don't do these things, instead do these things. Because, everybody tells people when they get divorced, oh, the first thing you need to do is run out and date. And that's probably the worst thing that you can do because you haven't healed and done all those things. So I think it's, I'm going to be honest. I am not somebody who gets up at 5 a.m. every day and writes a chapter and, spends so much time writing. It's more for me when I'm really inspired, or when I get a message from a woman. And honestly, I have two very close friends who are going through divorces right now, and they're in different stages. And it has just reignited, that I need to have a tool to help them with this.
Oh, that's awesome. That's great. So it sounds like there's a lot of natural inspiration, and you found a way to naturally come back to the book when you have that experience that you want to share. So that's, yeah. And you're right. Like, some people have to get their book done, they need to set a regular schedule and a regular time. And, others work better more spontaneously, responding to the ideas in the moment, and both can work depending on your personality too. So that's great that you found a rhythm in terms of the manuscript writing. Well, as you're writing through your book, we help people with all sorts of editorial services. I'm just curious if you have any questions for me in terms of the editorial process as you're thinking about completing your book, and just, any questions you have about the overall process. Happy to answer those.
Absolutely. And I think one of the things that is confusing as a new author is all of the opportunities or the types of publishing that are available. You hear things about self-publishing or publishing, so if you could kind of help clarify a little bit about that, that would be very helpful.
Yes, and that is exactly the right first question to ask in terms of the kind of editing or even writing that you should do. Choosing the kind of publishing venue that you want helps determine a lot of those answers for you. So I usually think of publishing right now. I mean, the landscape is changing so fast. There are probably like 18 other models out there that I haven't even heard of. But in general, I think of publishing as fitting into 3 general models. And one is the traditional publishing model that we've all grown up with and are super familiar with. And in that kind of model, you submit a proposal, typically through a literary agent. Right now we have 5 big publishers and a smattering of independent, smaller publishers that follow the traditional model. But most publishers are looking for an agent to represent you. And so that can just take some time, in terms of locating an agent, finding an agent who can be your advocate, and finding the right fit editor at a publishing house for you. But the traditional publishing model is you submit your proposal. So the idea is you write a proposal first, typically, and not the whole manuscript in most cases, unless it's fiction or memoir. But most nonfiction manuscripts they'll want a proposal. So they read that. And if your proposal is accepted, you're usually assigned an executive editor who reads through your manuscript and puts a whole lot of notes and questions, some editorial changes on your manuscript, and then sends it back to you primarily for you to do the revisions. And it's primarily content and organizational feedback. They'll probably make some line edits if they need to. And then it goes back to them. And if they think it's ready for the copy editor, it'll go on to the next level of editing, which is copy editing, which is pretty much a different team member that goes through and checks grammar, makes all the punctuation consistent, all according to a style guide. Usually in trade publishing, it's the Chicago Manual of Style. You get that marked up manuscript back to approve their changes, and then it's sent to the designer. And after design, usually there's another chance for you to look at the proofs, look at the design, and an internal proofreader usually proofs your book at that point too. So all the editing is taken care of once you get that manuscript turned in it, outside of any revisions, deeper revisions that your executive editor wants you to make. They typically pay an advance based on how much money they expect to make on your book. And so that can vary quite a bit in terms of the publishing house and in terms of your platform and how much money they expect to make from your book. So that's generally the publishing model all of us have. Well, I can't say all of us have grown up with now because, it's been a while since we've had hybrid publishers and self-publishing enter the market. But, they're the ones that typically set the editorial standards that I think most people are trying to reach. On the other end is self-publishing, where the author is the publisher. So the author is in charge of hiring their own publishing team, and that can include any level of editing they think they want to make their book as good as it can be. They hire their own designers, they hire their own marketing support, if they need it. And then they figure out how they want to distribute their book, whether it's uploading to Amazon or working with a company like Ingram Spark, which allows you to start your own publishing imprint and publish books that way. And so you don't have to wait with that kind of model, but you do need to educate yourself about the publishing process to know what kind of partners you want to hire. And so that's kind of where your budget comes into play, and you make an investment in your own book. And then when the book sells, you get the majority of the royalties. Usually when you distribute books, even through Amazon, Amazon takes a cut too. But outside of that, you receive your own royalties, as opposed to traditional publishing, which takes a good bit of the royalties and pays you a smaller percentage, and every publisher is different. Now, to bridge the gap, there's something called hybrid publishing, where it's a combination where the author puts in usually some skin in the game, the publisher puts some skin in the game, and it's like a joint venture. So there are all sorts of different arrangements that can be made in the middle. And so there's usually some cost to the author, but they get to pick the partner that they want to work with that provides basically what they don't want to do, what they would rather outsource. And then the author gets to have control over the pieces of the process that they would rather have control over. And it really is right in the middle of the process. It's royalties can vary, fees can vary. So that's the general model. And then with hybrid publishing and self-publishing, of course, you don't need a proposal, but we always recommend creating something called a book plan, which is like, it's like a proposal where you've thought through all the parts of your idea, your platform, your book outline before you start writing, just so you know you've laid a good foundation for writing your book and that you'll be writing in the right direction. And you know from the inside out that you're embodying your message. Now's the right time to write a book. All the pieces that you need to know to stay motivated through a long-term creative process. So either way, all the pieces that you've been doing all along, talking to people, building your platform, knowing that you're embodying your message before you started writing the book. I mean, you've done everything in the right order. So that's pretty awesome. And then in terms of, I think that kind of covers the publishing venue, but that leads us into the different types of editing, if that's helpful to talk about.
That would be great. Yes.
Yeah. So kind of starting from the top down, because it's all a spectrum, but the way we look at it is, if you have an outline and really tend to be more of a speaker than a writer, or maybe you don't have time to write your book and it's something that's worth outsourcing to someone else, there's the option of ghostwriting or hiring a writing partner. So that's like all on one end of the spectrum. And so that usually involves where your ghostwriter or writing partner will interview you, and all you need to do is answer questions. You work together on structuring the book and positioning the book and all of that, but primarily it's all your content, but typically it's spoken. And so the writer will just turn that into a written book and then partner with you to make sure that the book is saying what you want to say. And then there's all sorts of ways of partnering with people where maybe you do some of the writing and they do other parts of the writing. So you can kind of work with a writing consultant or writing partner that way. Now, if you finished your manuscript and you want feedback and really some support with organization and content questions, maybe from the perspective of from your target reader, one thing we do is we do a manuscript review for people, which is the same thing that an executive editor would do at a traditional publisher. Just go through it in terms of content, organization, give feedback, and then just that empowers the author to make the changes themselves if they're confident in their writing abilities. If not, they could hire a developmental editor that could just execute those kinds of changes for them. So typically developmental editing is about organization and content questions. And then there's substantive editing or line editing, which is really more about the flow of your writing, sentence by sentence and paragraph by paragraph, making sure transitions are clear, your writing voice matches your real voice, it feels authentic and it expresses yourself clearly. Also, just all of the small details of the writing craft. So that's a line editing level. And then from there, it's copy editing and proofreading, like we talked about. Then it gets mechanical. Copy editing is usually the grammar edit according to a style guide. And then proofreading is typically after the designed proofs, just to do one more check to make sure it's as error-free as it possibly can be. And I usually tell people, we usually recommend at least the 3 levels that traditional publishers provide, like a manuscript review plus copy editing plus proofreading, if you want it to match the level of quality that most of the bigger publishers are putting out there, no matter how you publish. So that was a
So what do you,
lot. I'm sorry.
no, that was extremely helpful because, you know, as a new author, you're looking at all these things and you have all these questions and you hear, you know, you can research, but there's always different things out there. So what do you think is the biggest mistake that new authors make when they're trying to be published
Mm,
for the first time?
yeah, I would say, um, first of all, sitting down and trying to write their manuscript by themselves without getting input from their target readers and just even from other authors and other professionals. I think most people believe that if they need to write a book, they need to go write it alone and by themselves and figure it all out by themselves. And that just doesn't have to be the case anymore. There's just so much support we can get. You know, just like you started a podcast, you know, a lot of authors have a way of sharing their ideas, their manuscript ideas before they write their book with their clients, you know, through workshops, through their speaking. I mean, there are just so many ways to test your idea now to really be confident in the outline that you follow. So I would say that's actually the biggest mistake I see is that people feel like they have to labor alone and they don't. And that's one good news. And then I would say, the second biggest one is probably not investing in proofreading when they're all done. People who self-publish and hybrid publish, I would say, because they've seen it so often, they think there just can't possibly be any more mistakes. But it's actually the design process and being at the end when you're tired and you're very used to your manuscript, you just don't, authors and even any editor that you've worked with before to that point, we just can't see that last layer of errors if we're too familiar with the content, if we read it over and over again. So that fresh pair of eyes at the end is crucial because those are the mistakes that readers see, the obvious ones. The ones that are invisible to us as the creators, but it's the ones that the readers see and they make an impression. So I would say on either end of the spectrum is where I think I see the two biggest mistakes.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. Well, good. Well, I'm trying to think if there's any other questions. Would you mind sharing a little bit about maybe the biggest aha you've seen in your readers or the people that you've talked to so far, just from your book, the response or the reaction, maybe the insight that you feel like has made the biggest impact on the people that you've talked about that makes you excited about sharing your book?
You know, I was sharing some things with one of my friends that's going through a divorce now. And I think the biggest aha for her was that, you know, sharing that she has to figure out who she is now. Like, really understanding, you know, to have permission to say, I'm not the person I was before I got married. And I'm not the person, you know, I was when I was married. And I've got to figure out who this new person is. And it's really just looking at it that way. That's a different way to look at it because a lot of times we feel like we have to be this person that we show to the world, you know, especially with social media these days. You have the perfect family or you have the perfect life or whatever. And so going through a divorce, it's like the saying, you know, I'm fine, it's fine, everything's fine. That's kind of like the divorce saying because everybody expects you to be fine. You know, it's a divorce, get over it, you know, go out on a few dates, you'll be fine.
Mm.
And it's really just that insight that you're not going to be fine. You know, it's not just going to go away. It takes time. And if you invest this time in yourself now and you really spend that time working on yourself, then you're going to be in a healthier place and a better place later.
Mm.
And I think it's just really, we don't often give ourselves that time. We are in an immediate society where everything happens quickly and fast. And regardless of whether you've been married a year or you've been married 18 years or 34 years, you're just supposed to, you know, get over it. And that's not what happens. And so I think it's just that validation that, you know what I'm feeling is normal and it's okay if I'm not okay for a while.
Mm-hmm.
And if, you know, somebody giving you the direction or permission or guidance to focus on you, just take a breath and focus on you. So, and I think that's really important because we don't do that often, and let alone when we're going through such a big life change.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. That's such a gift to give to your readers too. I mean, for them to not only know that they're not alone, but they have they have permission to be however they are. You know, there are no expectations, especially when we're grieving the loss of our dreams and all of that. So, well, thank you on behalf of your readers for
No.
sharing your hard-won wisdom with us. Yeah, that's awesome.
I appreciate the opportunity to talk about it, and I appreciate your insight. And you know, it's so helpful, like I said, as a new author, to hear, you know, from somebody who's been there and is an expert, what the options are and things to consider. So
yeah, well, and really any author who's has the personal experience, the direct experience, and knows that there's a need for their message is going to write a successful book. So yeah, thank you for that.
thank you, Bethany, for the opportunity to talk about Recovering Cinderella.
And I'm always just so grateful for a chance to have a conversation with an author and an editor. So I thank you both for your time today, coming together to talk about Recovering Cinderella and Keri's message. I would love to just see, you know, if somebody wanted to learn more about each of you, where can people connect with you, Keri, or learn more about you or follow your journey as you continue down this path of getting your book published?
Thank you. Yes. So I do have a website, recoveringcinderella.com. And there I have a little bit about me, some of my blogs. They can pre-order the book, and I'm actually offering some incentives, some behind the scenes peaks as I go through this journey. And then I'm on social media, Recovering Cinderella on Facebook and Instagram. And then my podcast is on every streaming platform. It's Recovering Cinderella. And I took a hiatus for a few years. I had some life changes and moved and COVID, but I'm getting ready to start re-recording new podcasts again in the next few months.
Keri, and then Amanda, how can people learn more about Split Seed Media and the different services that you offer there?
Sure. Well, the first step might be to go to our website, which is splitseedmedia.com. And then feel free to connect to me on LinkedIn. It's just Amanda Rooker on LinkedIn.
Incredible. Well, thank you both so much.
Oh, thank you, Beth.
Thank you.
Thank you, Keri.